President Trump terminated trade negotiations with Canada. Have you spoken with Foreign Minister Anand? What can Canada do to resume these?
Well, I think what happened is one of the leaders in Canada was running ads in the United States on tariffs that took President Reagan's words out of context. Even the Reagan Foundation criticized them for it. But I have not spoken. I've been traveling since yesterday. I have not spoken to the foreign minister since then. But
you said the president was frustrated, but is this just a knee-jerk reaction?
I think the frustration has built up over time. I've been involved in some of these negotiations, and the Canadians have been very difficult to negotiate with. And you look at all the countries around the world that we've made deals with, and the fact that we're now negotiating with Mexico separately.
Trade talks terminated. President Trump has announced that he is ending negotiations with Canada, all over an advertisement put out by Ontario's government.
I heard that the president heard our ad. I'm sure he wasn't too happy, but it's real because it was coming from the best president the country's ever seen, Ronald Reagan. So it's very effective. It's probably one of the best ads I've ever seen, and it's coming from Ronald Reagan's voice, and it's going to be focused on right across the country, but also in Republican health.
You know when two neighbors who've known each other for decades suddenly stop talking? When one slams the door and says, "That's it, I'm done negotiating"? That's exactly what's happening right now between the United States and Canada. For months, both sides have been trying to iron out their trade tensions. Tariffs, digital taxes, supply chains. But suddenly, the White House has walked away. President Trump officially declared that all trade negotiations with Canada have been terminated, accusing Ottawa of being very difficult to negotiate with. Those 6 words hit harder than they seem, because behind them lies a breakdown between two of the world's closest allies, and a story of pride, politics, and power. It all started quietly, almost like a normal diplomatic disagreement. But as often happens with Trump's White House, things escalated fast. Talks had been tense for weeks, revolving around issues like Canada's digital tax on big U.S. tech companies, new tariffs on aluminum, and Washington's constant pressure to change trade rules it said were unfair. American advisors inside the White House complained that the Canadians were slow, stubborn, and unwilling to compromise. On the other side, Canadian officials insisted they were being reasonable, just cautious. They said Canada wouldn't sign a deal under threats or media pressure. Then came the spark that lit the fire. The province of Ontario aired a controversial ad campaign targeting American viewers. The ad featured the voice of former President Ronald Reagan, a clip from the 1980s warning that tariffs destroy jobs. The message was clear. Tariffs hurt everyone, especially workers. But to the Trump administration, that ad wasn't just a message. It was an insult. Inside the Oval Office, aides told the president that Canada was deliberately interfering in U.S. politics, trying to shame Washington using one of America's most beloved Republican icons. Within hours, Trump fired off a statement saying that because of Canada's egregious behavior, all trade talks were officially terminated. And just like that, months of negotiation came crashing down. White House advisors backed the move, saying the Canadians had been impossible to deal with and very frustrating. Marco Rubio, echoing the administration's frustration, said Canada's negotiation tactics were overly cautious, self-protective, and damaging to North American growth. Across the border, the reaction was sharp but measured. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had previously been praised by Trump as a world-class leader, expressed disappointment, saying Canada was always ready to negotiate in good faith, but would never compromise its sovereignty. He urged calm, reminding citizens that diplomacy often goes through rough patches. But privately, insiders said Carney was stunned. The entire strategy of gradual progress with Washington had just been blown apart. The moment the news broke, Canadian industries went into panic mode. The stock prices of key export sectors, steel, aluminum, and lumber, dipped within hours. The auto sector, heavily reliant on cross-border supply chains, warned that if tariffs expanded, jobs could vanish overnight. The lumber industry, already battered by years of U.S. protectionism, braced for another round of uncertainty. For ordinary Canadians, it felt like déjà vu. The last time a US president picked a fight with Canada over trade, thousands of workers paid the price. Now it seemed history was repeating itself. Only this time, the rhetoric was even harsher. To understand how we got here, you have to look at the deeper picture. Canada and the United States are not just neighbors, they're economic twins in many ways. Every day, billions of dollars in goods cross the border. Cars built in Ontario are finished in Michigan. Oil refined in Alberta fuels American cities. Farmers on both sides depend on each other's markets. Yet, beneath that cooperation lies a constant tension about who benefits more. Trump's team has long argued that the US gives too much and gets too little. Canada, they say, hides behind tariffs, subsidies, and complex regulations that protect its industries. Washington's view is that Canada talks like a partner but negotiates like a rival. Ottawa, on the other hand, insists it's simply protecting its national interests, the same way America does. So when Trump declared Canada very difficult to negotiate with, it wasn't just frustration, it was the culmination of months of bitterness. His advisors complained that Canadian negotiators were dragging their feet, refusing to make major concessions on auto trade, and using provincial politics to stall progress. Meanwhile, Canadian officials were equally frustrated. They said the US kept changing demands mid-negotiation, adding new conditions every week, and threatening more tariffs if things didn't move quickly enough. One senior diplomat was quoted as saying, "You can't negotiate with a gun pointed at your head." And then, that Ontario ad arrived. Perfectly timed, politically explosive. The Reagan quote was like salt on an open wound. To Trump, it wasn't just about trade anymore, it was personal. Within hours of the ad going live, his team began drafting the termination statement. By nightfall, it was official. The fallout was immediate. Markets dipped, Canadian media called it an unnecessary escalation, and American business groups began lobbying to resume talks, fearing disruption in supply chains. Some Republican lawmakers privately admitted they were blindsided. They hadn't expected Trump to go that far. But the White House doubled down. In a press briefing, an economic advisor said bluntly, "We're done." The Canadians have been difficult for years. They don't move fast enough, they don't deliver what they promise, and they use the media to apply pressure. Enough is enough. That tone marked a new phase in the relationship, one where diplomacy was replaced by open frustration. In Ottawa, the government scrambled to control the narrative. Carney met with provincial leaders, trying to project calm and unity. He reminded them that Canada had weathered worse, and that its economy was strong enough to endure temporary turbulence. But behind closed doors, his team faced tough questions. How did things fall apart so quickly? Was it a miscalculation, or was the White House never serious about a deal in the first place? The irony is that just a few weeks earlier, Trump had praised Carney personally, calling him smart, tough, and capable. The two leaders had met in Washington, exchanging smiles for the cameras. Insiders described the meeting as productive, with both sides optimistic. But optimism doesn't always survive politics. Within days, that goodwill evaporated. What's at stake now is bigger than just one deal. It's about trust. Canada and the US have always disagreed on softwood lumber, dairy, pipelines, but there was always a sense that negotiation would prevail. This time feels different. The language is sharper, the patience is gone, and the world is watching. If you step back and look at the pattern, you can see the strategy behind Trump's move. Walking away is a classic negotiation tactic. Create shock, apply pressure, and force the other side to come crawling back. It's worked for him before. But Canada doesn't play that way. Instead of chasing, Ottawa has chosen to stay calm and emphasize long-term resilience. Carney's government has already begun reaching out to European and Asian partners, exploring ways to expand trade beyond the US. There's talk of accelerating deals with Japan, South Korea, and the UK, a clear sign that Canada doesn't want to be trapped in Washington's orbit. Still, no country can fully replace the American market. The US is Canada's largest customer, and any disruption hurts both sides. Automakers in Detroit depend on Canadian factories. Construction companies in Chicago rely on Canadian lumber. Energy exports flow in both directions. That's why economists are warning that a prolonged standoff could cause more pain for America than expected. But politics often trumps economics. Inside the White House, the decision to end talks is being celebrated as a show of strength. Supporters say it proves Trump won't tolerate bad deals or disrespect. Critics argue it's reckless, that alienating Canada undermines regional stability. And somewhere in the middle, ordinary Americans are left wondering why their grocery bills and car prices keep rising. In Canada, public sentiment has hardened. Polls show that most Canadians believe the U.S. can't be trusted under Trump's leadership. Even conservative politicians who once admired him are distancing themselves, calling the move short-sighted and emotionally driven. The Ontario government, the one behind the controversial ad, eventually offered to pull the commercial, hoping to calm tensions. But by then, the damage was done. What makes this standoff so fascinating is how quickly perception changed. For months, both sides claimed progress. Then one ad, one statement, and everything collapsed. It shows how fragile diplomacy can be when politics, pride, and public opinion collide. It also shows how personal trade policy has become. In the past, disputes were handled quietly by diplomats. Now, they unfold on social media in real time. Tweets replace press conferences. Insults replace talking points. The result? Every disagreement becomes a spectacle, and that spectacle feeds public anger on both sides. Behind the scenes, some American advisors are urging Trump to reconsider. They point out that Canada's economy is deeply linked with the U.S. and that punishing Ottawa could backfire. They warn that shutting down negotiations leaves America isolated just as global competition is intensifying. But others say that's exactly the point, that Trump wants to redefine what negotiation means in an America-first world. So, while the White House says Canada is difficult to negotiate with, the real question might be, who isn't? In a world of competing interests and fragile egos, negotiation itself has become the hardest trade of all. And as North America's most important partnership stands at a crossroads, one thing is certain: this isn't over. The talks may have ended, but the story has only just begun.